From one WBBA founding member to another, I'm delighted to welcome on stage now from OpenServe, Sunil Piyarlall.
Thank you, Mark. What an honor to be standing here in front of such an esteemed audience today. A few things I want to start to talk about before I get into my presentation. When I got off my flight from South Africa and I landed in Thailand and people put their hands together and greeted me, it humbled me. From there, I went to the taxi and I got the same greeting. I then went to my hotel and I went to the shops and restaurants around and I got the same greeting. And today I choose to greet you in that way, Swadee Kap. What a humbling greeting. Congratulations to the Thai. Then I want to talk a little bit about when Mark and Jenny called me and said, I'd like you to do a keynote at the World Broadband Association event. And I said, what do I say to such an esteemed audience, a group of industry OEMs, industry leaders, industry experts? And you've seen a lot of technology presentations before me. So I decided not to go into technology, but to use a few pictures to try and convey a message to you, to try and welcome you to the World Broadband Association and to try and get you to join us to deliver on some of our visions and some of our missions. And I'm going to split my presentation into 4 themes. Firstly, let there be light. Let there be fiber. Let there be the presence of fiber. And secondly, I'll talk about what fiber brings you, the evolution of PON and the speed of fiber. Thirdly, I want to talk about the beauty of fiber. And you heard a lot today about green and about how fiber stimulates innovation. And lastly, I want to talk about the omnipresence of fiber and how we can get fiber throughout the world. So I chose this slide because on Monday this week, hundreds of millions of people around the world celebrated Deepavali. And I thought, what an appropriate way to start my conversation in talking about how they celebrated the victory of light over darkness. And what are we talking about here today? We're talking about light. We're talking about connecting the unconnected. We're talking about the beauty of light. And that is where I will start to say, let there be light. Let us as operators, let us as vendors, let us as industry leaders try and provide fiber to as many parts of this world as possible. And more importantly, I'm representing the African continent here, and I'll show you how I'm appealing to the world to get the African continent connected. So let's start off by saying, let there be light. And then I want to talk a little bit about the speed of light. And when I talk about the speed of light, I want to look at where we started. Let's go back to dial-up connectivity about 30 years ago. When I kind of started my career in communications. And if you had a dial-up modem making any form of sound and you were connected to any part of the world, you would jump for joy. And then we moved to ISDN. And with ISDN and 64 kilobits or 128 kilobits per second, you had bragging rights. You really had high-speed connectivity. And in the early 2000s, we saw ADSL come about. And then we saw the evolution of high-speed connectivity take off at quite a rapid pace. Around 2011, 2012, we saw the world deploying GPON as a technology. And colleagues, this is really the most technical slide I have. So apologies for getting into some of the technical terms, but I want to explain the evolution of PON because I believe it's important. 10 years ago, we started off with GPON, a technology that gives us about 2 gigabits per second download and 1 gigabit per second upload. And 5 years later, 6 years later, we see the world introducing XGS-PON, which is symmetrical 10 gigabits per second PON. And OpenServe, as an organization, has deployed XGS-PON in the South African network. There's countries across the world that have provided XGS-PON as connectivity, giving you up to 10 gigabits per second in your home. What are you going to do with that kind of bandwidth? I'll discuss in a few slides to come. But that's essentially where we're sitting now. Between 2015 and 2020, we've seen the introduction of XGS-PON. And we see the huge rollout of XGS-PON today across the world. And as we're starting to roll out XGS-PON, OpenServe, together with other companies, are starting to play around with 25 gig PON, giving you access to 20 gigabits per second at your home. And in sitting in the Huawei Ultra Broadband session yesterday, we saw the introduction of 50 gig PON. We saw equipment, we saw vendors starting to roll out 50 gig PON. Essentially, you're getting 40 gigabits per second access to your house. Most importantly, all of this taking place over one optical distribution network. All you're doing is you're changing the light. You're changing the light at the end of your distribution network. And what I want to highlight here is one of the reasons I joined the World Broadband Forum, the World Broadband Association, sorry, not the World Broadband Forum. I joined the World Broadband Association, and I'm actively involved in the generational roadmap where we're looking at applications and services for 2030 and beyond. And how do we keep up with applications, with services, with end user devices, with the pace at which technology is evolving? Today, you've got gigabit access in your house. Gigabit connectivity is a norm. Do you have devices that can actually use that capability? Do you have hand user devices that can actually use 10 gigabit per second? Can you even do a speed test on your cell phone with 10 gigabits per second? So those are some of the questions we ask ourselves. And we get into these conversations with the World Broadband Association. We say, how do we develop a generational roadmap for 2030 and beyond to make sure that we link the OEMs, we link the device manufacturers with the pace of technology? So now that I've spoken about the pace of technology, now that I've spoken about the speed of technology, why do we need that speed? Why do we need such high-speed internet access? Let's start at the bottom of the screen. If you've got 4 megabits per second at home, if you have a 4 megabit per second DSL line, and I apologize for the size of the text if you can't read it, but essentially you need 4 megabits per second to watch a HD video. To downstream, to watch Netflix, you need 4 megabits per second. If you can afford 8K TV, you certainly can afford 1 gigabit per second line. And really you don't need that, but that's probably about 200 or 300 megabits per second to watch a very, very high definition 8K movie. So why do you need 10 gigabits per second? Why do you need 40 gigabits per second? And that's why I make the statement that human impatience is the killer app. If you want to download a 15 gigabit file, you don't want to wait an hour to do it. You want to do it in 10 or 15 seconds. You want to quickly download that file. And the reason I say human impatience is the killer app is because of that gratification, that instant gratification of knowing that when you want access to the speed, you can get it. You can quickly download the file and you can continue with the rest of your life. You don't have to watch the circle going round and round and go make a few cups of coffee and wait for download. So that is why you need it. You need it for instant gratification. You need it for cloud interactivity. And more importantly, for immersive virtual reality. And that's where we are heading with why technologies are evolving and the demand for high-speed connectivity. When I started off talking about in the early 1990s when a dial-up internet was sufficient. Today, if you have 10 gigabits per second at your house, you still want more, and purely for that instant gratification. So let's look at some of the trends, and I want to talk about 2 trends here, and again, emphasizing why, as OpenServe, we've joined the World Broadband Association. The first trend is that gigabit is a reality. Many countries with fiber optic access around the world are providing at least a 1 gigabit per second service. And with that, we're seeing that some of the networks are 25 gig ready today. Not really selling services on it, but they are 25 gig ready, and in the very near future, you're going to start seeing the requirement for more and more 10 gig services. So when I looked and I just checked a few weeks before I got here, there was over 20 countries providing services, 10 gig services on XGS-PON. Chorus is one of them. China Telecom's big into it. So you can get 4 gigabit per second or 8 gigabit per second service at your home right now, today. And you're going to see more than 10 gig evolving soon. We saw the standard for 50 gig PON approved late last year. I think it was November last year. And then the other trend is that the world is going 5G. But importantly, with the world going 5G, is that 5G is going fixed. So to try and give you the wireless connectivity, the high-speed, low-latency connectivity that you would get from 5G, you're going to need at least a fiber connection to the site. I don't think microwave technology has reached the point where you can get a good enough backhaul on microwave to get the experience of 10 gigabit per second or more. Also, the reason the world is going fixed with 5G is the ease of deployment. Your optical distribution networks are there already. You don't have to go and roll out fiber. It's the tower companies that need to make space available. And I think Vishesh is going to talk a lot about that in his presentation about financing of tower companies. So what do we do as the World Broadband Association? And Martin and Mark have spoken a lot about this. And I'll just touch on it a little bit because it's part of my presentation and part of the reason I've joined the World Broadband Association. So I'm part of the generational roadmap working group where we're looking at services and applications for 2030 and beyond. But the World Broadband Association also focuses on working group 2 that does case studies on industry and success stories in the industry. And then thirdly, about sustainability, looking at not just getting a greener and more sustainable network, but also sustainability from a return on investment perspective and sustainability of operators. And some of the challenges that we see in the industry and that the World Broadband Association is trying to address, one that every speaker today has touched on, is the inequality of broadband access. It's the ability to bridge that digital divide. It's the ability to try and assist in connecting the unconnected. And that a lot of my presentation is actually going to focus on that specific challenge. The second challenge is ensuring sustainability and providing return on investment for service providers. And then delivering end-to-end experience. Fourthly, developing impactful regulation and policy. And we saw Atsuko talk about the involvement of the ITU in the World Broadband Association and how we're getting standards developed and how we're getting regulation around the connectivity. Enabling vertical integration, and lastly, building a future-proof network. And I spoke about the speed, the evolution of PON, but using one optical distribution network. Building one network that is future-proof and just changing your end technologies, just changing your active equipment on that network. Having said that, I want to come to the third theme of my network, the beauty of light. And it was this week that the Thai have celebrated Loi Krathong. And it's not just the physical beauty of light. It's not just light lighting up the sky. But I want to talk about the beauty of light in its ability, again, to provide us with connectivity to the unconnected. The beauty of light to help us to bridge this digital divide that we've seen since the inception of the internet, since the inception of broadband connectivity. The beauty of light to do that in an economical and efficient way. The second thing I want to talk about, the beauty of light, is the beauty of light in its ability to unlock innovation, providing you with connectivity, providing you with high-speed connectivity, providing you with high-speed, low-latency connectivity, and unlocking innovation. What I want to highlight in unlocking innovation is the people that need it the most, the unconnected, the developing countries that need the high-speed, low-latency connectivity to let them participate in the digital transformation so badly needed, especially for small and medium enterprises, for small office, home office, participation in the fourth industrial revolution. And that is the beauty of light. Thirdly, we had a lot of talk. I think every speaker spoke about going greener, about saving the planet, about the ability of fiber to use less power, the energy consumption of fiber, and how moving to fiber doesn't only help us from an economic sense in saving energy, saving us operating costs, but more importantly, in assisting us to get a greener planet. Lastly, I spoke about future-proofing the network. How do we future-proof the network? How do we stop continuously building? Copper has been around with us for a long time. And with fiber, we got to actually remove the copper and replace it. We're hoping that fiber would be around with us. If you deploy fiber now, the next 20 to 30 years, you can reuse that fiber. And hence my talk on rolling out one optical distribution network and just changing the technology on it. The evolution from GPON to XGS-PON to 25 gig PON is seamless. One optical distribution network. Just changing the lambda as you go to 50 gig PON and 100 gig PON allows you to use the same optical distribution network with the coexistence of other network elements. So that is the beauty of light. This is an interesting stat, and I saw Atsuko touch on it a little bit. And I talk about global internet usage statistics. This is a graph, and apologies if you cannot read the text at the bottom, but it shows percentage of users of internet from white to dark blue going from 10% to 100%. And if you look at the developing countries, let's look at most of the countries on the African continent. Look at their connectivity. Look at the white blocks that shows between 0 to 10%, not connectivity, but access to internet. And we've heard between Morten and Atsuko talk about the ability of connectivity to the internet to save lives. Just access to information during the COVID pandemic helped save lives. And the reason I put up this and the next slide is, it's not that we don't have light. We have light. If you look at the African continent, and you look at the landing stations, the submarine landing stations, and you look at the access to bandwidth that we have along the continent connecting the east with the west, all the cables landing around the continent, and you go back to what happens to that bandwidth. What happens to this light? Does that light shine across the continent? That is where, as the World Broadband Association, we're looking at innovative ways. We're looking at ways to try and see how we can take this huge capacity that lands on our shorelines all across Africa into Africa. The huge capacity that lands on other continents that require connectivity. How do we take that, whether it's through 5G, whether it's through fiber, how do we provide some form of connectivity across the continent? I just showed that same stat graphically because I think it passes a stronger message. Here's where some of the first world countries are sitting, above 80% connectivity. Here's where Africa, sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern and Southern Africa are sitting, about 20% average connectivity. The world average sitting at about 50%. Even the world average is not good enough. It's not good enough to have only 50% of the world having access to the internet. So just getting to my final slides, I want to speak about the omnipresence of light. How do we make sure that there is light everywhere? There's not just light shining in certain parts of the world, not just light shining on the first world countries, not just light passing through certain continents. I've shown you the slide on Africa where the light actually goes from the coastline, bypasses the continent, and connects the east to the west, connecting first world countries. So here I want to appeal to people that haven't been part of the World Broadband Association to join us. And I'll talk a little bit about that just now. Join us. Join China Telecom. Join OpenReach. Join Swisscom. Join Huawei and Nokia. Join Omdia. Join Chorus. And join me as OpenServe. Join us to try and bridge this digital divide. Join us to try and get connectivity to the unconnected. Join us to give people access to the internet, and especially with the developing countries. And lastly, with that slide, I want to say get connected, stay connected, and Swadika Hap.